Hey, Wildlings, before we get started, I just want to take a quick moment to talk about my brand new sponsor, Audible. You guys know Audible. They sponsor all of our favorite podcasts, and now that includes Sean vs. Wild. Guys, if you're like me, you like to read. And also, if you're like me, you lead a pretty busy lifestyle. Now you can get the enjoyment out of books, whether you're in the office, the gym, or you're just a sweaty band dude in a van on a 30-hour drive across the country. How, you ask? All you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/Sean vs. Wild. You heard me, audibletrial.com/Sean vs. Wild. And when you do, you can enjoy a 30-day free trial of Audible for absolutely free. Yes, it's free. When you sign up, Audible is going to give you one free audiobook to enjoy. And we'll also give your boy Sean a little help with keeping the lights on here at the Smithsonian. All you got to do, again, audibletrial.com/Sean vs. Wild. Simply click the Start Your Trial button, sign into your Amazon account, and choose from over 180,000 titles. You guys hear me talk a lot about my favorite books, especially Dune. You can pick up Dune. I picked up Dune. Or maybe you prefer Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or Star Wars or Game of Thrones. Maybe you want to check out Stephen King's It before the movie comes out. Maybe you want to check out The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. All of these audiobooks are available and many more on Audible. What's awesome too is you can download it to your Kindle. You can download it to your phone, any of your devices. They're going to work on all of them, guys. All you have to do, again, just go to audibletrial.com/Sean vs. Wild. That's audibletrial.com/Sean vs. Wild. One more time, audibletrial.com/Sean vs. Wild, and enjoy your free audiobook right now. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Sean vs. Wild podcast. I'm your host, the man, the myth, the Sean Thriller Smith, the guy putting rad back into talk radio. And oh yeah, people! It's time to rock and roll all night and podcast every Tuesday. Today, joining me in the Smithsonian, I've got Derek Allen, a.k.a. DJA, a.k.a. Doc Money. Money! You know him from 812 Dirty Squad. He's going to be talking about the squad, but he's also going to be talking about his illustrious career because this dude has been making beats and collaborating with people, some of the biggest names in hip-hop and EDM, any kind of electronic music. And he's going to be talking about essentially how he went from being the bassist of Left Out, if you guys remember them, taking that DIY approach to now, like I said, working with, people like Riff Raff, Diplo, Trinidad James. There's quite an extensive list. You're going to hear it all on the podcast. But Derek's a great dude. It was a great guest. And I think you guys are really going to enjoy this one. I know I certainly did. And yeah, dude. So big thanks to Derek for doing this episode. Also, guys, I got to tell you, I am actually recording this with a brand new Zoom H1. It's a handheld recorder. I use the H6 in the podcast studio. That's what I plug all the mics into, do all the levels with, etc. This is H1, man. This is like smaller than my phone, basically handheld. And now I can really do a lot of podcasting on the go or do these monologues on the go. You know what I'm saying? If I'm driving, if I need to make some notes, what have you. Now I have this Zoom H1 and I got it for $70 off of Amazon. So I'm pretty stoked to do it. And if you hear how it sounds, this is some pretty quality stuff right here. I don't think it's going to sound too much different than my normal intros. So pretty stoked to have a new tool in my tool belt, in my Al Borland tool belt. Guys, I am wearing a flannel shirt, so yes, very Al Borland-like. And speaking of tools in my tool belt, guys, the perfect tool to have in your tool belt is an awesome t-shirt with your name on it or your band's name on it or your idea on it. And to get those things printed, you got to go to audiofileinc.com, AUDIOPHILEINK.com. And you're going to talk to Shane. Tell him the Wild Man sent you. Shane has been printing all my stuff for well over a decade now. He can print it for you. The brands that you like, the items that you like, Shane can do it all, man. He is the dude. So go to audiofileinc.com, talk to Shane, and get the best deal in town, no matter what town you live in. And he does ship to all 50 nifty United States. So yeah, definitely check that out. Also, I got to give a big shout out to my bro Joe Brock, man. He is booping the dials per usual. And I can't believe it's almost been a year, but we're now 40 plus episodes deep, and Joe's helped me with each and every one of them. So I got to say thank you, Joe. And I know he's starting school up, so the fact that he's still able to help me every week is really something special. So thank you very much, Joe, for being such an awesome dude. And thank you guys so much for being awesome dudes and checking out the podcast. I really appreciate it. A lot of my Facebook numbers and things like that have been going up this week. My listens have been going up, and I hope that trend just continues on and on into 2018. Now's the time that I've really been planning a lot of stuff for 2018 with the next year. How do I take the show to the next level? So be prepared, because in 2018, I think I'm going to be introducing some new content, some more content each week. So maybe give you another show that isn't necessarily the typical interview format. Maybe it's just me ranting. Maybe it's me and my friends talking about music or movies, or having discussions or arguments about things that are going on in the world. You know, I just want kind of a more looser format, something different. So that way, maybe if you're not into the typical format of Sean versus Wild, you might enjoy this. Or if you love the typical format of Sean versus Wild, maybe you want to have another episode each week. So be prepared for that. 2018. It's all on paper right now. Nothing's been executed yet. But yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for your continued support. Please like, share, and subscribe on iTunes, on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter, and just interact with me. I've been really kind of drumming up some interaction there on my personal Facebook page. Please just feel free to interact with me, man. Give me some feedback. You know, if you want a guest on there, if you want to be a guest on here, just hit me up. Let me know. Let's work something out. But yeah, and I tell you what, I've taken up a lot of your time. But yeah, big thanks to Shane. Big thanks to Joe for booping these dials again. Big thanks to you, the listener. And dude, shout out to Amazon for this Zoom H1 recorder. I'm so stoked on it. All right, well, that's enough for me, guys. Let's get wild. So yeah, I saw you admiring my 8-bit collection there, bro.
Yeah, I love retro video games. I really do.
Really?
Yeah, I don't really own that many. I play them on emulators, which is kind of cheating, but I still love them, you know?
What is your favorite retro video game?
Well, I mean, this is kind of basic, but my favorite retro game music and stuff is Mega Man 2 and DuckTales, which is a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, the Moon stage specifically from DuckTales.
Stage, yeah. But I really like those games too. So, you know, they're probably up there. DuckTales is one, Mega Man 2.
Are you influenced a lot, or like, I guess you have a passion for the actual music in most of these games?
Yeah, especially like the I mean, I think that a lot of the like early 2010, 2012 EDM like sounds like that. A lot of like harmonies and stuff. So yeah, I've actually been into that stuff for a really long time. I was flipping those melodies back when it was not even clean EDM, when it was like dirty mid 2000s like French Ed Banger type stuff and things like that.
Well, I'm going to tell you what, I don't know much about EDM, so I'm going to allow you to educate me in the next hour or so. And you got to educate the listeners too. So they're along for the ride.
My pleasure, man. Thank you.
Hey, no problem. Guys, this is the Sean vs. Wild podcast. I'm your host, as always, the man, the myth, the Sean Thriller Smith. Joining me today in the Smithsonian, live and in living color, is Derek Allen, a.k.a. DJA, a.k.a. you guys know him best as Doc Money from the 812 Dirty Squads.
Yes, sir. That's me.
Yeah. You're just waiting. You're like, oh, yeah, go ahead and tell me more about my accomplishments.
Well, I mean, there's more AKAs, you know, that's...
What are some more of your AKAs?
Sleazy D was one that the Emmanuel guys were fond of. That turned into Sleege, I think, and Deej, which was another one that really drove me crazy back in the day that they used to call me all the time. But yeah, man, that's how it is. You make music, you get called some different names.
Yeah. Or you just live your life and somebody's bound to give you a nickname that you like or you don't like that will last forever. How did you get hooked up with the Emmanuel guys? Because I'm just going to fire right in here to 812 Dirty Squad, because a lot of people have requested, they're like, Derek Allen needs to be on the show. Doc Money needs to be on the show to talk about Dirty Squad. So let's get right into the meat and potatoes of that. So how did you get hooked up with those guys?
So I was in a band when I was in high school. I was in a band called Left Out. We were from sort of the generation of Louisville bands like Scam Impaired, Blue Collar Revenge Theory. So we played with Emmanuel when they were really young.
We're talking the
Dumb Luck.
the Brick House days.
Oh no, I mean we're talking like
Pandemonium Arcade.
Oh no, we're talking like we played at the mall in Indiana. Like we played a show, like a free show in this big space in the mall. And I remember the Emmanuel guys like had, their parents were with them, like still not just driving them there, but were there with them at the show.
Supervising.
Yeah, chaperoning.
Right.
Exactly. So I mean, we knew them from way back. We were all from Indiana. And I was always kicking around with them, when I stopped being in my band and kind of stopped being in bands in general. I was hanging around them trying to like play synthesizer in their band or trying to do anything but play the guitar or whatever. And the Dirty Squad was just kind of like a natural thing. We were all making music at the same time that they were getting serious. And so we were all hanging out all the time, and it just kind of happened. I mean, I made beats and made hip-hop music anyways. And Matt Breen and John Burke, I'd have to say they pretty much started it. We just started making songs.
I got to get John Burke on this show because not just because Burke is an amazing rapper in the Dirty Squad, but all of his musical endeavors from the Linwoods to all of his YouTube. That guy, I'm surprised that guy is not a millionaire based off his just viral songs and videos alone.
It's coming. I mean, one day that dude, he's destined for like the like a viral Ellen video, or something real wholesome, which is fire. That's dope.
The Catman dude.
Yeah, exactly. Like no cursing, just like cats.
Yeah, exactly. With a huge bill on his hat. And dude, he's always so funny because I remember one time I show up and I'm we're playing a show at the Roxy. Cool brag. But we're playing the show at the Roxy. We're in LA, and he comes out to see us, and I'm wearing my head's shaved, and I have a long, my beard is longer at that time, and I'm wearing like these like sunglasses that are like John Lennon circle glasses, and he just looks at me and he's like, "Brother, you look like a villain from Wild Wild West." And I was just like, "Burke, I've missed you. It's been so good to see you."
Well, that dude, that's exactly like where I came up. We were, I grew up in Indiana, and there weren't a lot of bands, so it was like Left Out, the Linwoods. That was about it. I mean, there were a handful of other bands that were not at all pop punk or any kind of poppy at all. They were like weird art stuff or hardcore stuff or whatever. And I mean, we just spent a lot of time together. We when we were young, we went out of town, did our first shows out of town together and stuff. We were always with those guys.
How did you get into playing music to start with? Because you started out, like you said, bassist of Left Out. What made you want to pick up an instrument in the first place? I come from a family of musicians, and I'm related to. I'm actually related to like the Maxwells and the Mom's Music people. So my mom worked there at the store when I was a kid, so I was always around it anyways. And then I was at the age, and it was just kind of happening at that time. It was early on, and there was stuff happening in Indiana, bands like Operation Cliff Clavin, right?
And there was basically like 10 bands made up of 4 or 5 members. You know what I mean? Like mixing and matching members, and it's just amazing putting out tapes. These guys had like a label doing their own thing, so that was really what made me want to play music. Was that sort of weird DIY stuff?
What's great about DIY is like that's basically it now. I mean, you can sign to a major label and hopefully make millions of dollars. That probably works out great if you're, Adam Levine from Maroon 5 or something like that. But for, 99% of us out there, it is DIY. So if you learned it early, if you learned the tips and tricks early, you're way ahead of the curve.
Well, I mean, it's the same thing for me as anything that I do as far as music production is not really anything that I set out to do. It's just sort of a DIY thing. So like, I mean, making beats was just making beats, and then that sort of transitioned into like, well, then let's mix this Pro Tools session and let's treat this like a record, and
right.
So yeah, it's weird because nowadays I guess it's second nature to kids that they can do it, but I sort of grew up where it became more and more possible, and that was really, it was a huge influence on me, the things changing and Pro Tools and computers and like cheap M boxes and stuff.
Well, especially growing up in the 90s as you did, and I grew up late 90s, early 2000s and stuff. I'm 31. How old are you?
I just turned 36.
36.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're not too much different in age. So we're still of that generation where we're used to people being like, "Oh, you have a CD, you must be signed to a label. You know, you must
Totally.
have a record deal. Oh, you have a tape out, you must have a record deal."
Totally.
And it was just not commonplace for too many people to be like, "I'm putting this out myself and making it legit. It's not a burnt CD. It's not a, TDK tape that I've recorded. I'm actually like getting it pressed and getting my own T-shirts made and stuff like that." But luckily, that's kind of where I feel like even where this podcast came from is I remember being, in high school having a band and being like, "All right, well, we're going to record something, and yeah, it might be on burnt CDs, but we're going to make our own album covers, and then we're going to have our own tapes, or not tapes, but we're going to have our own shirts and merch and put on our own shows and do that, and until somebody's bound to see us."
I mean, that's really a big part of me growing up and doing music is that we happened to get people to come out and see us, and a lot of it was because we had a club in Jeffersonville that was totally illegal and just in a warehouse, but it was at a time.
Was it in the Quadrangle?
Yeah, it was the 540 Club in the
540,
Quadrangle, and it was at a time when people were, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was the age they were or the period of history, but people weren't real violent, and they were kind of like keeping drinking and stuff under wraps, so like things were pretty chill. Yeah, even if like somebody came around and was like, "What's going on here?" It seemed pretty innocuous, like it was like some kind of nerdy kids like playing music for each other, even if the crowd was kind of big.
Right, yeah. It's like something you only see in movies now. You know what I'm saying? A simpler time.
Well, I mean, yeah, and that's the thing is as things get bigger, it just naturally there's going to be maybe some different elements and people have conflicts or whatever. But at that time, we were able to play like pretty big shows and things were always pretty chill and people got along.
Sure.
And,
And your kid will grow up and be like, "Dad, tell me about the good old days."
Yeah.
Whenever.
Yeah. Like what were the 90s
chill.
like?
What was it like with people being chill?
Yeah.
So you picked up a bass and you're in Left Out. And Left Out was a band that, growing up, me going to my first shows, that's a band that I heard about several times. I saw you guys at the Brick House, actually a couple times. And what I remember most is that black and red sticker. Black and red Left Out sticker on the back of everybody's, Mazda Protege in that back window, the Left Out sticker.
I think that we were, that was a big influence from Planet X Records, but I was obsessed with giving away stuff with the CD, like multiple stickers.
Sure.
But I mean, still like that. And just like you say, now that's how everything is. Like it's more about like the limited run t-shirt or whatever than it is the CD.
Right. Exactly. So, how do you make the transition, I guess? Because playing bass, it is musical, and making beats, musical. How do you make that transition from, hey, I'm going to play bass and Left Out, to I'm going to start doing hip hop and I'm going to start making beats?
Probably, like spite, and I'm just joking, but no, I mean, you play in bands and it's hard. It's hard to be in a band. Like anybody that's ever played any kind of music knows that it's hard for more than 2 or 3 people to do something like that. It's
True.
kind of incredible. And that was like hugely attractive to me. Like when Left Out broke up, I was like, well, I can just make music like by myself. And when I started, it wasn't so much like I'm going to make beats. It was just like I'm going to make music in the studio in some kind of creative way. And, I really like synthesizers and stuff like that. And then it was kind of natural to start making things that people actually wanted to listen to.
Right.
Which is, a lot of times hip hop music. I grew up in the late 90s being obsessed with like DJ Shadow and stuff like that, and loved all of the underground backpacker type stuff. And this part of the country had some like really amazing roots with Anticon and hip hop from Cincinnati and different parts of Ohio and stuff. So I was always into that stuff, and I just kind of slowly started getting more serious about it. I when I was in Left Out, I spent a huge amount of time at Better Days Records in Louisville. It's owned by a guy named Ben Jones, who is a just legend, house legend, Chicago legend, has been involved in really legitimate house music for a really long time, as far back as I think that you could go in this part of the country. So I was really lucky to kind of constantly hang around that record store and learn about like everything from house music to Daft Punk to DJ Screw to like whatever, you know, and they had just racks and racks of stuff. So all of those things kind of culminated in me just making music at home by myself.
So it's not just one of those things where it's like, yeah, man, I got a Notorious B.I.G. tape when I was, you know, for Christmas when I was 11, and that's what started it all. It was more of you got an education quickly because you hung out with the right person at the right time that learned you a thing or two.
I mean, the people like that, I think, are some of the most important people in our lives. But I can say without a doubt that if it wasn't for those people, that I wouldn't know anything or be able to do anything. Because it was totally through the influence and education of other people. We listened to a lot of what at the time was mainstream rap when we were, you know, punk kids or whatever. And I mean, when the Chronic 2001 album came out, like that was a really big deal. And it still is a big deal. It changed like production and mixing and clipping drums. And so like, it was funny because it was actually pretty natural. It wasn't like, just one day, you know. I kind of had a history of already really being into it. And like I say, that Chronic 2001, if you were of the age back then, it was night and day. Just the way it sounded was night and it was like the difference between you know, how a lot of records are mixed nowadays really super loud and how stuff just wasn't as loud in the 80s.
The difference between pre-Sgt. Pepper and post-Sgt. Pepper almost, you know?
I mean, it's huge. Like, it really was, like, such a big deal, and we were most of the left out guys, and everybody that we were hung out with, we listened to it endlessly, and, you know, so it was a pretty natural thing.
That's a great album. I used to listen to it quite a bit. My sister had a Tiburon, and we bumped that in the Tiburon on the way to school quite a bit. I was probably too young to be singing some of the verses, but, you know, that's what's cool about it.
It's a really timeless record, and I mean, it's like, you know, Nate Dogg is, for having done so much legendary stuff in his life, that record, I mean, the stuff that he did on that album will never, never, never die. It'll just live forever.
That's awesome. And so from there, like, what kind of music were you making? I guess you said you like transitioned into hip hop, but when you first started, were you making it even on a computer, or were you doing it all with hardware at the time, or?
It was early enough that it wasn't really viable to do it on a computer when I got started. So I would have like a little cheap drum machine. And then basically like within a 1 or 2 year period, things started to change and I got Acid Pro. Mm-hmm. And that was, I mean, I have friends that still make bangers on Acid Pro.
Were you just kind of doing it live, or were you just like, I guess, how would you, without a computer, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, because I mean, obviously people did it, but to someone that's uneducated like myself, how would you record your beats, or would you just make beats and play them live, and then that would be like, hey, I made this beat? Or would you actually lay it on a tape or CD or something?
Yeah,
or?
I had like a little cheap, you know, multi-track type thing.
Like a Tascam, like 4-channel?
Yeah, and you would just like record everything, and then right around the same time, it was like, I think that I got like a CD burner, and it came with a copy of Acid Pro, and talk about like life change. You know what I mean? I didn't even know what it was, and just installed it. And I mean, I used that for years and made I mean, Diplo made records on Acid Pro. People, it's just crazy. Like, you know, software that came out in 1999 was so influential between like maybe 99 and 05, because it was just not possible to do that before.
Right. Yeah, I remember having a copy of like Cakewalk or something like that.
Yeah.
And I remember buying it from Circuit City, and I was like, this is $60, man. Like, hopefully. And of course, I never learned it. I wasn't good at it, but, you know, I tried. But I remember it being like, this is a game changer. Nor did I ever have a computer that was really good enough to.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
no, make it happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you know, being lucky enough to have like older family members who were musicians, I would bother them about their home studio setups, but their setups made no sense.
Right.
And I could never get anything to work. And it like up until Acid and Reason and stuff like that, it was just like the computer was just a mess. It was like no music came out of it ever.
I do remember. Wow, with a lot of intensity there. I was talking about how I do remember, but I do remember a friend of mine let me borrow a program probably in like 2004, and it was like all just pre-recorded bars. So it's like dragging and dropping these like colored bars, and like your red bars are all bass lines or whatever. So you would they're already pre-recorded bass lines, and then you would drop your drum beats in there, and then they would have like their, more like ambient kind of stuff. And it was like making rave music or something, house music maybe, I don't know.
Right.
And I remember really, really enjoying it, but it was definitely just a hobby.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I never could get the hang of it. I couldn't wrap my brain around it.
I mean, it took me years to be able to make anything even vaguely decent, like out of any kind of computer program or anything. But I also was, I grew up, like went to high school and are still have a great group of friends who we were always into like industrial music,
sure,
and like goth stuff. And I mean, that was all drum machines and all keyboards. So, I had several groups of friends that were so influential with what we did together. And one guy would have a drum machine and one guy would have a distortion pedal or whatever.
Right.
You would just make nonsense.
Yeah, you would just take what you had and piece that together, and if it worked, it worked, and if it didn't, it was still fun.
Yeah, and so this is something that I wanted to mention to you specifically because I had a feeling that you were a fan of the Southern Indiana hidden gem Begilbson.
Oh, Begilbson. Between my riding and roping and hunting and fishing and gigging.
So I actually
Real
had
Gibson lyric there.
Yeah, no, I mean they are the definition of hidden gem. You know what I mean?
I think I still have the CD somewhere, believe it or not.
Oh, I've hard drive archives. Like someday, a really solid, nice little remastered like YouTube.
Begilbson.
It's the definition of hidden gem. But the other half of Begilbson is another really good friend of mine, and we had we tried to do like a 2-man electronic kind of group with guitar,
sure,
and we actually did play at Brick House a little bit in Louisville back in the day.
What was it called?
Stereo 2.
Stereo 2.
I think we opened up for. I would like try to link up with like the keyboard bands. They were like popping back in the day. You know what I mean? So I think we opened for a couple of the like keyboard bands at the time. I'm trying, like Anniversary and stuff like that. We never opened for the Anniversary, but it was that kind. It was like
Sweet Marie, yeah,
it was like after that.
I've heard that song.
yeah. But it was a lot of fun, and he is also a really great guy who I've like been making music with probably since we were 15 or something. So it's.
So where are we in the time frame now between, I guess, high school when you're starting and you're making your first beats and you got a couple years under your belt? What year would you say we are now in your timeline in your life?
This is like mid 2000s. I mean, I was just like finishing school. I
finishing high school or college?
Just finishing college. I was just taking classes. I spent some time in New Orleans. I went down there and interned at a studio and just got some credits and stuff, and I came back, just kept going, man, just kept making music all the time. And around this time is when I spent a whole lot of time with that's when Dirty Squad kind of got going. And this is about the time that I started to really reach out to people on the internet, and things were kind of changing really fast.
This is when MySpace was a thing.
Yeah, I mean it was huge, and this was when Diplo originally was a part of a DJ group called Hollertronics in Philadelphia, and I started DJing more in Louisville and sort of getting into what they were doing and what other people were doing around the country, and we all started connecting on the internet on a message board. And that was kind of the beginning of me getting involved with not only Diplo, but a lot of people from the East Coast and from Philly and New York and stuff like that. So, I'm in Louisville and I'm DJing. It was at a time when it was kind of hard to get people to really take it seriously. It's a little easier nowadays, but just doing after parties, just whatever,
Sure.
Like just kind of anything. We did a whole lot of house parties with the Emmanuel guys back in the day, and again, like started taking it more seriously and doing little shows and stuff. And I
remember seeing you guys play like headliners, like a packed crowd at. Or maybe you played with Dirty J, I think, maybe at headliners or something like that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was like, we took it very seriously.
Yeah.
It was like a silly thing, and nowadays, it's not silly at all.
No, it's not. And honestly, I think with Dirty Squad, now I don't know anybody else that had done it, so maybe it's just what my limited knowledge is, but I think Dirty Squad for me was like, it was like the precursor to like listening to Dirt Nasty or Riff Raff or something like that. And I love Dirt Nasty, Riff Raff, Three Loco, all that sort of thing now. Absolutely love it. But I think it's because I loved Dirty Squad a whole decade before that, you know?
Well, I mean, I do know that some of those guys were doing stuff early on, but it is kind of shocking to me that we were doing what we were doing because, I mean, maybe it's not shocking because we weren't thinking about it very hard. We were just doing it. I was working at a group home at the time with like teenage age boys who were super troubled. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, really, really serious. But it was amazing to learn from those kids about like what was really popping.
Right.
Because at the time there was no, it's like now it's like so easy to get on your phone or whatever and you know like what's happening with kids. But back then it was like impossible.
So you had a direct like lifeline. You had an ear to the ground basically.
I mean,
for what was good.
It was huge, and it's crazy because I've known a lot of other people, Diplo included, who did the same thing, and in the same way, like it was dope to be connected to kids at that time. And so anyways, I mean, the biggest influence on the Dirty Squad was the group Crime Mob from Atlanta, which is like, I mean, they're still kind of around, but it was in that era of like Little John and Crunk, and it just made sense. It was like kind of raw and kind of stripped down.
Sure.
Kind of aggressive, and so it was just like second nature to us, you know?
Let me ask you this. This might be a little personal question, but was it around that time that you started like seeing your stuff being picked up or like starting cashing some paychecks? Because I definitely know you did a song with Emmanuel for the Resident Evil soundtrack.
Yeah, I did a remix for them for, what are there, like 6 of those movies or something?
Yeah,
I think it was the third.
It was Extinction. Yeah,
I think it was the third one. Yeah, it was. I went to school and I moved away to Vancouver in Canada. I went to school and started getting more involved with a lot of different people, but in particular Diplo. And we had a mutual friend out there who is still a huge part of the label and everything that I've done. So. Yeah, that was about the time that things kind of started moving for me. Doing the remix for them, I'm trying to think at the time, but it was definitely like
you did the Punk Goes Crunk Kryptonite for them as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I think I worked on that. I worked on a couple of things, man. That was when they were doing that second album, so they would send me some stems and some sessions and stuff. And then we kept on doing things. We connected when they were on tour, and I would come home and connect with them then. But that was definitely when things started getting more serious. I was living, when I left school, I lived on the East Coast for quite a while with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. We lived in Boston. And I was spending a lot of time in New York. I was working with a producer named Disco D. He was like a legend of like Detroit music, like this techno from Detroit and stuff. And at the time, he was really doing really, really well for producing a great 50 Cent song called Ski Mask Way. So it was like, I was in New York, I was in Boston, I was doing stuff with Emmanuel, doing the remixes and things like that, and at the same time, I started going down to New York to work with Diplo and MIA, and that's when things really kind of started to change. MIA being the British rapper, female vocalist.
With Paper Planes. I mean, you guys probably heard that from Slumdog Millionaire soundtrack.
Yep, Paper Planes. So like that was all the same period basically. I would go down to New York and work with them. I would go to Philly and I would work with Diplo, and we were sort of finishing Paper Planes, finishing other stuff, and that was when he said, hey, I want to start a label. I want to do something more serious, and I want everything to be more serious. What do you think about moving to Philly, and let's get this going? So I moved from Boston to Philly. It was me and Diplo. We had our Paul Devereaux, who's the A&R for Mad Decent. He was located in Canada, and we had one other guy who was located in New York, and that was it, man. We just kind of started everything in like 2007.
That's insane. It's so crazy that like, you know, because Diplo is a household name. You know what I'm saying? At this point, I feel. I mean, I don't know much about electronic music, and you mentioned the name Diplo, and I'm like, yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about.
It's funny, man.
It's so crazy that you're right there when shit's popping off.
Well, we always thought he was famous. I mean, it's crazy. Like, you know, he was always kind of like a very you know, what's the word, marketable personality. He was always kind of like a cool guy, and he was good at being a cool guy. So back in the day, it was like, I mean, I already thought he was dope, and he was really small. And then as we kept doing stuff, it just got bigger and bigger. I mean, I think that the crazy Diplo thing is he did a BlackBerry commercial, and that was when, like, you know, older relatives would be like, oh, so it's like a job. Like,
you can make $1 or $2 with this.
So you like get paid for this, and I'm like, yeah, it's not just, you know, like this is real or whatever.
Sure. And you went on too, and you continue just to make music, and but you went on to work with. I mean, you were giving me a list of just some people, but you know, I talked about Riff Raff earlier. You've worked with Riff Raff and Mad Decent. You were talking about Mad Decent earlier, so you know you're part of their kind of roster of things that is going on with Mad Decent. Then also too, I mean, Lil Wayne, for crying out loud. Let me see what I wrote down here. Diplo, of course, Lil Wayne, 2 Chainz. You know,
yeah, man.
The biggest, you know, some of the biggest hip hop artists of the last decade. One of my personal favorites, Trinidad James. You worked with Trinidad James too.
T. James, yeah, man.
Dude, All Gold Everything was the soundtrack to my summer of 2013. I believe that was like on every mixed CD that I made, and by mixed CD I mean Spotify playlist.
That song, that video, it's almost like, you know, there's always different pockets of hip hop and rap music, and I often joke that, like, you know, people like have never heard each other's music, but they have massive fan bases, and there's always different realms. But that All Gold Everything video just changed, like, just everything.
I remember hearing All Gold Everything on satellite radio when I was at work one time. We had satellite radio playing, and I heard it, and I was just like, this song is crazy. Like, this song is just mind-blowing to me. And I was immediately drawn to it. I was like, this is awesome. Like, and, you know, say what people, you know, people say whatever you want about Trinidad James, but had there not been any Trinidad James, I will tell you this, you know, the hugest single of like the last 2 years, Uptown Funk. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's Rip.
He got paid.
I'm sure he did. That guy is just like Uncle Scrooge right now, diving into a vault of gold coins.
I mean, that's like the dream, you know?
Yeah. I mean, as soon as I heard Uptown Funk, I was like, oh my God, this is All Gold Everything just sped up, and it's funkier.
Yeah. I mean, it, you know, that stuff like that. And to me, you know, to be kind of overly serious, that stuff is super important to me because I firmly, you know, overly diverse taste in music, like respect everything, even if I don't like it. Like, it's, you know, if someone can make it happen and it's working, like, incredible.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a miracle. So,
well, say whatever you want. It left a footprint on someone or music in general big enough to where a year later, the biggest single of the year is sampling it. So say whatever you want about it. You know what I'm saying? You know, say whatever you want about Michael McDonald, but had he not been around, we're not going to get regulators, guys.
Oh yeah, well, see, I mean, I'm a huge Michael McDonald fan.
Yeah,
like
so yes, let's say whatever we want about Michael McDonald.
No, it's not even a joke. Like, I'm an enormous fan of all that stuff.
Forgetting.
No, he's amazing. He's amazing. Style icon, hair icon, beard icon. No.
I feel he looks like everyone's father. Michael McDonald, if you're listening, hopefully you are. Come on the show. We'll talk about your fashion sense. But yeah, I mean, there you go. You're involved with people that are out there making moves, making it happen, and you're out there making moves, making it happen. You lived in LA for a while.
Yeah, so I lived in Philly for a long time. I got the Mad Decent label going with those guys, and I worked with Diplo. I mean, that meant very little back in the day because it was just everything. I mean, he was still flying, like coach or whatever to shows and stuff. So we did kind of everything, very DIY, put the records together, boxed everything up ourselves, did all the shipping. And things kind of started getting bigger, and we started letting some things go. We stopped making as much vinyl. And then, one really cool story is, I think it was maybe, God, I can't even remember, maybe 2008, but we got a permit to have a block party in front of a building that we owned in Philadelphia. And it was literally just like a $10 block party permit to block off like literally 1 or 2 blocks of a street.
Right.
And, we had a bunch of speakers and a bunch of stuff, and we just drug it all out in the street and rented a bunch of, dunk tanks, kiddie pools. It was just a big mess. And we started the Mad Decent Block Party. And, now they do it in different ways. It's essentially a festival, it's just like a touring festival now or whatever. But, the festival thing, people don't like festivals or people love them or what, and that's fine. It's all good. But it's really amazing to know that we were able to do something where literally it was like the drunk guys on the street, were like, this is great. Can we do this every month? You know what I mean? Like, we love you guys. So, that stuff like that is amazing.
Well, how crazy is it to see where it came from? It goes from a block party to a festival.
And
like that.
Yeah, and that, it's funny because back in the day, it was like we did one year, 2 years, I don't know, maybe the third year it started getting a little bigger, but people were like, hey, can you bring this to like Australia? Like, can you bring, you guys need a tour, you do whatever. So now they do it, like I say, it's essentially just like a lot of other festivals, but it's amazing that it came from that where people were like, can you please bring exactly what you have in North Philly, like to our city or to our neighborhood or whatever.
That's awesome. Yeah, dude. And we're going to dive in a little deeper about you moving to LA. But before that, I think it's time to just really show off your chops, man. Let's hear some of your skills. And you have brought with you a brand new track. You said just dropped, a couple weeks ago?
Yes, sir. Just, I think 2 weeks ago, if that.
All right. And it's called Limelight by Johnny Spanish.
Johnny Spanish. Johnny Spanish is a Louisville rapper. I've worked with him for quite a while. This is some brand new stuff that I'm very proud of. It's probably the best I've ever heard from him.
That's awesome. Is it the best work you've done lately, or what?
It is very, very clean. I'm very proud of how smooth it is.
That's fantastic. Well, you know what? Like I said, it's time to hear your chops. It's time to let everybody know what you've been up to lately. So, guys, this is Limelight by DJA and Johnny Spanish.
I'm hopping in the limelight. I'm hopping in the limelight. The women taste like peach. That watermelon sweet. Give me that lemon squeeze. I'm hopping in the limelight. It feel like passion fruit. I got that applesauce. She wet as apple juice. I'm hopping in the limelight. I'm hopping in the limelight. I'm hopping in the limelight. The women taste like peach. That watermelon sweet. Give me that lemon squeeze. I'm hopping in the limelight. I thought I told y'all. I told my family we gon' ball. And all my bros here, it's like roll call. Man, they been in it for the long haul. I swear to God, I'm colder than I did a ride. You fuck around, you cross my dogs. By now I have to get involved like her. These city hoes all on my job. They trying to get up in my spot. Go put the work, girl, make it drive by swerve. That Ferrari, that sick shit. I pull up and these boys gon' have a conniption. That's word. I got a prescription of good weed and bad ones. I'm out of commission. I'm done. I fucking told y'all. I told my family we gon' ball. And all my bros here, it's like roll call. Man, they been in it for the long. I'm hopping in the limelight. The women taste like peach. That watermelon sweet. Give me that lemon squeeze. I'm hopping in the limelight. It feel like passion fruit. I got that applesauce. She wet as apple juice. I'm hopping in the limelight. I'm hopping in the limelight. I'm hopping in the limelight. The women taste like peach, that watermelon sweet. Give me that lemon squeeze. I'm hopping in the limelight. I got the phone call. They said you ready, boy, you gon' ball. And some were praying I was gon' fall, but I've been in it for the long haul. I've been around through ups and downs, I persevered. I had a vision off the sight, but that was all so crystal clear. I worked. I looked myself off in the mirror, said you gon' make that classic shit, or you just gonna disappear. Hell no. No, boy, I deserve this. You gon' make mistakes, no, we all can't be perfect. This new shit I'm hearing is all on the surface. I'm back on that bullshit, you all should be nervous, yeah. I fucking told y'all, I told my family we gon' ball. And all my bros here, it's like roll call. Man, I've been in it for the long. I'm hopping in the limelight. The women taste like peach, that watermelon sweet. Give me that lemon squeeze. I'm hopping in the limelight. It feel like passion fruit. I got that applesauce. She wet as apple juice. I'm hopping in the limelight. I'm hopping in the limelight. I'm hopping in the limelight. The women taste like peach, that watermelon sweet. Give me that lemon squeeze. I'm hopping in the limelight.
All right, guys, that was Limelight, DJA, a.k.a. Doc Money, with Johnny Spanish. So that's a hot little jam you got there, brother.
Thanks, man.
Hey, you're welcome, brother. You're welcome. And we were talking on the break here just about life in general, but it turns out that you're a big movie fan as well.
Yeah, man. Long time movie nerd.
So am I. And so I'm glad we had that conversation, because let's go ahead and just, you know what? Let's put that in our hat for right now. But let me go ahead and start where we left off. So you moved to LA. And don't worry, I'll have a perfect segue later. Go ahead.
It's all good. I moved to LA. I was in Philly with Diplo. We started Major Lazer in terms of Diplo has always been involved in Jamaican culture and dance hall music. He was going down there way before anybody else that I knew. And essentially Major Lazer was just his reggae project. And we started working on it in Philly. He would go to Jamaica. We would get verses from different MCs and different vocalists. And the other producer is a guy named Dave Switch. He's not a part of Major Lazer anymore, but he moved to LA. He's a London guy who did a lot of stuff. He was a big part of MIA. And so we started going out there and spending a lot of time with him working on the first Major Lazer record. And eventually it was like, it was just time to move. He was there all the time. I was going there all the time. My wife was in Philly. So we packed up, moved out there. We still kept our stuff. The Mad Decent headquarters in Philly is still there. But yeah, we all moved out, and that was when kind of things really started to change.
Well, I was going to say, that's when you started working with a ton of people at that point, right?
Well, I mean, that was like when everything changed, because we got out there and we were doing our thing, and, LA had Steve Aoki and Dim Mak Records and DJA and all this amazing music. But it was like right around 2011, Skrillex changed everything.
Yeah, dubstep.
I had a lot of dubstep records. Like I was, like doing a lot of dubstep stuff. I put out a solo record on Mad Decent it was just kind of like an R&B vocal kind of thing, but it was essentially dubstep. And yeah, man, he changed everything largely just because it sounded so different. I mean, the fact that it was dubstep in particular was kind of secondary to his mixing and his production. And that was when things really started to become like as bigger like they are now, where things started to get attention and people started to really severely go in this direction of fairly loud, hard dance music.
Sure. Well, even for somebody like me that doesn't, not familiar with the genre per se, I mean, I know exactly who Skrillex is, and I feel like most, Midwestern high school kids at that time knew who Skrillex was, or Deadmau5, or people of that. That's kind of when the floodgates, I guess, opened.
Pretty much, man. I mean, it was Deadmau5, it was Skrillex, and it was, as the Diplo was doing his thing, and Mad Decent was doing their thing, but Skrillex was sort of the gateway to what we think of nowadays with the big festivals, and the big crowds.
Yeah, I remember seeing Skrillex at Bonnaroo, for example.
Yeah.
And I was about a mile away.
Yeah,
and it was like a 4-hour long dance party.
Yeah. And I mean, like I say, I take it very seriously. Like, dubstep sounds very dated, like 2011, 2012. Yeah, I mean, we were involved with it from where it came from in the UK, and it was more like reggae. It was just like deep bass, dance hall samples, really long stoner kind of stuff. So that era sounds very dated, but you can't stress enough how important that was.
Well, look at it this way. Okay, one of my favorite bands of all time, Muse, had dubstep tracks on their album.
And that's a perfect example of dated. You know what I mean? Like, but it sounds very, very silly. I'm not even familiar, but a lot of my music sounds very silly because the production techniques and the sounds are just that when they're done 100,000 million times, it's gonna sound kind of trite. But still, that was when things started to change and you started to get these big artists, and that was when we started to see the label Mad Decent started producing artists that really, really went on to something. I mean, we had years we were just no different than any other punk label.
Right.
I mean, we had bands, we had a psychedelic band, we had a punk rock band, I love these guys, 3 Pakistani brothers from Philly. I mean, we had all sorts of stuff that didn't really pop. And this was when things started to get really, really big.
Well, to me, I was like, well, Derek Allen sure has made it. Whenever you're like, yeah, I'm hanging out with Riff Raff. And I'm like, oh, I know who Riff Raff is. I know who Dirt Nasty is.
Man, those guys are some of my favorite people I'm a big fan of comedy.
Sure.
I'm a big fan of the entertainment industry in general. I'm pretty nerdy about just fanning out. And those guys to me represent that's what Hollywood is. They're entertainers.
Absolutely. I remember I saw Dirt Nasty here in Louisville a couple years ago, and you were at the show. I actually hit you up, and you're like, yeah, I'm in the back. And we never got a chance to get together and have a Coors Light or anything. But one thing that I will never forget is, I had been following Dirt Nasty on YouTube and stuff and watching his videos since the song 1980, not since 1980.
Yeah.
But I knew him from MTV Spring Break 91, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But and then I remember after the show I went up and bought a t-shirt, and he was just by the merch stand, and I was like, dude, I've been waiting years to come see you play. Thank you so much for playing in Louisville, playing at Mercury Ballroom. And he literally just came across the table and gave me a big hug, and he's like, dude, I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you so much for coming. And I was like, this is a moment that I will not forget. Because that guy just literally took 2 seconds out of his day to just give me a hug and be like, hey man, thanks so much for coming.
He's a good dude, man. My wife is still in love with him to this day. I think from MTV in the 90s. And
sure, Simon Rex.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was this is one of my close friends.
Did you see him on Rock and Jock Baseball? He was so great.
Oh yeah, no, and she, he would come over and she would be not able to speak, and I'm like, come on, it's been a couple years now,
Sure. Well, in LA too, that's going to lead me to this story is we were out in LA in 2013, early 2014 maybe, recording our third album out there with Jeff from a band called Let Live. So we're out there in Torrance for 2 or 3 weeks. and you opened your home to us there for a night. We had a nice backyard barbecue, had some drinks. John Burke was showing us all the latest tracks that he'd been working on out in the garage studio.
Oh yeah,
and it was just beautiful out there. It was like you just pick oranges off the tree.
Oh yeah,
you know
no, it was great, man. It was great. Aside from the, I mean that house had like holes in the windows and the rent was outrageous. But other than, I'm just joking. But no, it was no. I mean that's what it's all about, man. I mean that's all I've ever really been about is just kicking it in the studio. You know, I love collaboration. I love like just it. Some people aren't really into it, but it's like you just lay down ideas and you just see what happens, and that's kind of what we've always been about.
Well, in that night too, there was a certain magic for me. Like, I mean, that sounds so dumb, but here I am in Los Angeles, just some kid that never thought he would do what he's doing, and I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm with you from back home. I'm with Burke from back home. There's a friend of mine that's with us from LA. You know, the band's there. It's like a little Louisville reunion, and then Chris Owens shows up.
Oh, the legend.
The legend, the man, the myth, the legend. Chris Owens shows up, and him and Kevin disappear for a couple hours and come back with mezcal, and he's like drinking it out of a cactus of some sort or some sort of gourd.
Right.
With chili powder or something all over it.
Right.
So I had a few, but I was like, man, Chris Owens, what a legend. You're right, the legend.
Well, it's fun. I don't want to incriminate myself or anybody too much, but there was definitely one night when I was working with Trinidad James and Chris came by with some kind of substance, and all that I know is that we were in the studio at like 6:30 in the morning, and I was like, you know, can we stop? Are you going to go home? Or no, he wanted to hang out. So that's the kind of influence that Chris has. You know what I mean? He comes around, just energizes everybody. Just brings out the best. You
know what I genuinely love about Chris Owens, though? I need to get him on the podcast. Chris, if you're listening, damn it, get on this show. But this guy is just genuinely doesn't care. Like, could not give a shit less. Like, if you're hanging out with Trinidad James, I genuinely feel like Chris Owens would be like, I don't know who that is. It's cool. Like, let's just hang out. And he's like that dude that it doesn't matter. He's so charismatic in his own, like, way. It kind of reminds me of, like, the guy kind of reminds me of, like, Henry Rollins. Charismatic in his way of, like, punk rock, doesn't give really a shit about anything, and I'm drawn to him, and other people are drawn to him as well.
I'm starting to think that he's a vampire as well because he doesn't really age and his hair doesn't grow. Everything just stays the same.
Just stays 100% the same. And when I was there, he was like, "Yeah, dude." So I'm friends with Kelly Osbourne, and and he's just like saying it. He's not name dropping or anything, but he was like, they wanted me to model some of Ozzy's stage outfits for the new tour. So I did, and he had all these pictures on Facebook of him like dressed in like these like Sabbath like Ozzy outfits, and he's like, yeah, that's why it is. And I'm just like, he says it nonchalantly, he's not bragging, it's not braggadocious in any way. He just is like telling me that story, and I'm like, man, that's really the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life. Maybe.
Well, here I can both name drop and date myself at the same time, which is pretty cool. But I met Kelly Osbourne once when she was in this was in like 2009. She was in a relationship with of some kind with Mark Ronson's sister, who is a person that I haven't thought about in a really long time. Samantha Ronson, that's her name. Wow. Yeah. Kind of forgot about her. I don't really know what she's up to. But no, yeah, it's like that's just what LA and Hollywood is like. You know,
what's she up to now? She's probably borrowing some money from Mark.
probably getting paid a lot to DJ. Let's be honest. That they're probably getting probably holding down a good fee. You know what I mean? Like holding down a good guarantee.
Exactly. And then that was around the same time. I don't know if it was maybe right before that or maybe right after that, because I hung out with Burke in LA on Warped Tour on 2013. We hung out with you when we were recording our album, and then we went on Warped Tour again in 2014, and I hung out with Burke. But somewhere in that time frame, he introduced me to something that you have done that has genuinely changed my life. And I'm talking about Blood Bros.
Blood Bros. I'm so happy to always hear it pronounced the right way. I get super annoyed when people say Blood Brothers. I have no idea why.
Yes, I'm talking about Blood Bros. Parts 1, 2, and 3 on SoundCloud, and that became my band's driving. You know, you'd have these 8, 9, 10 plus hour drives, And all 3 parts, we would just listen to it. Hey, we're driving to New York today. It's a 10-hour drive. Well, let's put on Blood Bros and listen to it the entire way there.
Man, Blood Bros is, Blood Bros comes from just a pure place of like love for music and love for movies, and you know what I mean? Like it's a totally authentic thing. That's all I can say.
Don't worry, guys. I'm putting the links in the description so you know what I'm talking about. So you will have experienced Blood Bros. But what it is essentially a project that I can definitely tell has been handled with extreme care of putting a lot of 80s, 90s,
training music from like montage music from these movies. So, from like Karate Kid or Bloodsport or Best of the Best, Team America. But how I know that it's handled with such extreme care is me being a huge movie fan. I'm like, oh, this is a song from No Retreat, No Surrender. Actually, here's a song from Rad. These movies that if you didn't have a VCR in the 80s, you really aren't going to know what I'm talking about. This is from The Legend of Billie Jean. This is from Transformers the movie. Right.
And that's the great thing about it is like I've listened to it and I can be like, it's from this movie, it's from this, it's from this.
Right.
Interspersed with quotes from the movie itself. It's the most glorious project I've heard.
Man, thank you so much. I mean, it's funny because Blood Bros seems so silly, and I actually take it very serious because to me it goes back to DJ mixtapes that are themed and kind of silly and have a lot of like dialogue samples and stuff like that. And it actually, I really, really love this story. I think it's pretty solid. So I always sampled music from Transformers the movie, G.I. Joe the movie, a lot of Dirty Squad songs were G.I. Joe samples. So I was always into that stuff. And, everybody kind of knows the You Have the Touch, You Have the Power. It was in Boogie Nights,
right? Exactly.
Whatever. So
the bass is taken away from my vocal,
exactly. Which is that's if you've ever engineered any record,
we're guaranteed a record contract. This stuff is that good.
Yeah, exactly. That's your life for like 20 years making any records with anybody. But so I was into that stuff. I sampled it a lot, and I was in Philly. And I was downloading a ton of ridiculous 80s music. And I found something from Rocky or from some other sort of training montage. And the genre of the MP3 was training. And I just thought that was so funny because I could just imagine like a dude who just took it like really seriously and had like a playlist of training stuff. And a good friend of mine, Dirty South Joe, legend in Philly and mad decent and DJing and music in general, he and I started talking about it. And I had the knowledge. I had like some rare stuff. He had a lot of movie knowledge, and we came together. And it was funny because we talked about it for a long time. We didn't do it, and some other DJs did some like similar stuff. And we'd be at South by Southwest or whatever, and it's like, oh, it's over. What a shame.
Like, yeah, until you came back to kill the game.
So that was so basically I had made a really long one, and it was like, well, this is way too long. We should split this up into 2, and we uploaded the first one, and it got a lot of attention, and we did a second one. But and
a third one,
and a third one. But to this day, the best thing that's ever happened with Blood Bros, the musician who did the You Got the Touch and a lot of other songs is Stan Bush, and I think it was about a year ago, maybe longer. He commented on SoundCloud and said, I may be biased, but I think this is really magical. And that's just like,
dude,
that's
so true.
that's like the best possible, there's really no one from those, a musician from those mixes that I would rather hear from than Stan Bush.
Yeah, exactly. That's the first time I've ever heard that. And you guys deserved it 100% because it is. And for anyone that does like go to the gym and you want a cardio playlist or lifting playlist, there you go. You have 3 45-minute long playlists right there at your disposal, and it will I guarantee you it will pump you up. So, and this is where my segue comes in from earlier, because all of those are themed from nostalgic movies, 80s, 90s, and other movies and stuff. So you're a big movie fan. What are some of the movies that you enjoy, or maybe you enjoyed growing up? What are some of the ones maybe you brought to the table when you're like, oh, we have to put this on Blood Bros?
I think that I was always kind of like, I always wanted to put the Mike Tyson's Punch Out training music in there. I couldn't really fit it, but it was just like so perfect. My particular age, I grew up heavy with the Karate Kid soundtracks.
Yeah, absolutely. Karate Kid, one of my absolute favorite film franchises. Well, the first three anyway, and I even love the next Karate Kid, Michael Ironside, the ultimate bad guy, and he's a bad guy in the next Karate Kid, so gotta love that.
It's really, it took me a really long time to realize that Karate Kid was like Rocky for kids of the 80s.
Sure.
It was like the same movie.
Right. But the soundtrack is killer because, yeah, everyone knows like you're the best, right?
Oh, yeah.
But Cruel Summer is like on that. Or Can You Feel the Night?
Yeah.
That's a great jam.
Yeah.
Karate Kid Part 2. Most people will know Glory of Love from either Peter Cetera, listening to it on a oldie station, or Newfound Glory covered it.
Right.
And dude, Karate Kid 3. I remember having a huge crush on my goodness, what is her name? She's in Teen Witch, and
right.
Blake Lively is her sister.
Right.
And what is her name? Robin Lively. There you go.
Yeah. Well, Karate Kid 3 was when didn't they brought back the villain from the first one, right? And
no, this is when they have like this dude that's like a young, I don't know, Schwarzenegger. He looks like, to me, he looked like Cody from Step by Step or something.
But Karate Kid 3 is also the bonsai tree, correct?
The bonsai tree.
Yeah, I really like that element of it.
Yeah. Here's a little fun fact. I'm a big Karate Kid fan. I've seen the Karate Kid franchise, literally, the first movie I've seen easily over 100 times. And then the franchise itself I've seen probably 50 times in general. But here's a fun fact. I used to look at a lot of the movie mistake websites.
Right.
I've never seen this actually on a movie mistakes website, so I submitted it to moviemistakes.com back in like 2004, and it never got approved, and I don't know why. But here's something that will blow your mind about Karate Kid, guys. Listen, if you're listening, prepare to have your minds blown. All right, so Karate Kid 1, Daniel LaRusso is 15 years old at the beginning.
Right.
He turns 16. He gets his car.
Right.
He's in high school.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? He turns 16 in Karate Kid 1, gets his car. The next day, wins the tournament. Okay?
Yeah.
So, fast forward to Karate Kid 2. He just had his prom. Him and Allie break up. He's having a rough summer. He goes to Okinawa. Karate Kid 3, he comes back from Okinawa and somehow is a freshman in college. Like, they never took into consideration that and the thing is he's a freshman in college, and somebody might say, oh, well, it's just a few years later. He actually, the thing is they're talking about him defending his title as the returning champion of the All Valley Karate tournament.
Right.
So it's essentially 1 year from the first one, and somehow he's a freshman in college.
He just came back from Japan, and they were like, well, he's fine. Just
you
give
know
him
what?
his degree.
He learned a lot in Okinawa, so he'll skip a couple grades.
Just boost him up.
Yeah.
No big deal.
So I'm a big Karate Kid fan. What are some other movies that you loved growing up?
Man, I am a big fan of like dystopian sci-fi. Like that's kind of my favorite thing. I love
everything you just said here.
Yeah, I mean, and this isn't rare. There's plenty of guys look just like me, same deal. But my grandmother had a weird crush on Harrison Ford, so I watched.
So you're a huge Blade Runner.
I watched
fan.
Blade Runner
And
with my grandmother.
Blade Runner is my favorite movie of all time. So. Did not know you were going to say Blade Runner. I am super stoked on that. We have quite a bit to talk about off of tape once the tape cuts.
Well, I'm always proud to say that I watched Blade Runner with my grandmother, because that just sounds crazy. Like I don't know a lot of grandmothers that probably had Blade Runner VHSs.
Yeah, might not have gotten it. Hey man, she sounds like a hip lady. Sounds like a hip lady. Are you stoked for the new Blade Runner sequel?
I mean, I actually am. I mean, that dude, his other stuff is cool, and
I saw Rivals. It was great.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked his movie Enemy with Jake Gyllenhaal, which is super weird.
Yeah.
And the dude, I can't remember. His
I can't ever
name.
remember that guy's name. Something like Villanueva.
I think it's
is his last
I think it's Denise or Dennis or something. You know, I think he's French Canadian.
Yeah.
I can't remember the guy's name. But whoever's doing the music is brilliant. He's a really excellent composer.
Is it in the style of like Vangelis?
It is.
I didn't say that's not his. That's not how you pronounce his name. Is it Vangelis?
It is
spelled that way.
It might be Vangelis, but I think it's actually Vangelis. But at any rate, this guy's like, he's known for being a very creative electronic sound designer, composer. And so I think that he's going to use like some synths that are similar to that, but he's skilled enough that he'll probably have his own vibe.
Sure.
You know?
Well, let me ask you some questions here as we're winding down. First question I'm going to ask you is it's kind of a loaded question, and feel free to discuss however much you'd like about it. But what is your thoughts? What are your thoughts now that EDM is essentially the new rock and roll? I mean, that's exactly what it's become. I mean, EDM is everywhere. It's selling out huge festivals. It's selling out stadiums. People are using the EDM techniques into their music. Rock bands are doing it. Pop bands are doing it. What do you think about it now that the game has changed?
It's weird, man. I mean, music has moved so quickly over the last couple years. Hip hop has changed dramatically in just the last 2 or 3 years. Electronic music is... This is kind of how I look at it. I know a lot of different rappers who are maybe they're aware of another person's name, but they've never heard their music. And you know, these people have really solid audiences, and they're from totally different worlds. So a part of me thinks that the trend element of it is people get tired of things, and that has to have something to do with it. But to me, the most important thing is that production techniques and like sort of the concepts of making records sort of spread around. Because I'm not a big fan of like people trying too hard to force a style into another. You get a lot of like really generic collaborations.
Sure.
You get like really generic rap vocalists collabing over an EDM beat or something like that. But on the other side of the coin, you have an artist like Vince Staples, who has a full length that came out this year, which is just kind of like, it's just good. It's not really rapping over electronic beats, nor is it just a regular hip hop record. It's just sort of taking these things and putting them together. So that's what I always want to happen, is that everything mixes up into a pot and that it kind of moves forward. Because to talk about electronic music right now, people change their styles like sometimes yearly. You have people who make something and then 2 years later the bulk of their releases are a whole different sound. It's like impossible to talk about because it's so rapid.
Sure.
So to me, I just look at it in a bigger picture of like, I appreciate that things are moving towards a greater goal, both in terms of like how people hear things and perform things, but from my perspective, more like in the studio and how they produce and mix things.
Sure.
So, I really like how instead of maybe 2 or 3 years ago, people were like, "Oh, I'm gonna go do this electronic thing." It's like a one-off or a lark or something. Now it's more like people are sort of just taking all of their influences and putting them together. You can see the same thing with kids, with rappers who are of a certain age. They grew up on Warped Tour music, and so a lot of their vocals and their melodies are more similar to emo or hardcore or whatever than they are hip-hop from 5 years ago, much less 10 or 15 years ago.
Sure.
So, man, I just try to look at it positive. I mean, it's crazy because a lot of the artists who are still around are the guys that were doing stuff in Europe 15 years ago. So hopefully it just means that everything can kind of move forward and push things forward. There's always periods where things feel really trite and really boring, and then usually it moves on from there, you know?
It kind of, to hear you talk about it, it kind of reminds me of, to bring it into a genre of music that I'm familiar with, something like an Eddie Van Halen, where music is a certain way, and then Eddie Van Halen comes out on guitar, and then as a guitarist, people are like, "Oh my gosh, there's all these skills that I didn't know about, and this is the next level." And then for years, you get music that just is either taking those skills to the next level, or you have so many generic Van Halen ripoffs throughout the years, and then eventually, all those skills mesh together, and music goes off in its own path. You know what I'm saying? Like it just becomes an amalgam, and then you have modern rock music or a lot of the metal. You know what I'm saying? There's not a big difference between Van Halen and then it meshes into a band like Pantera. You know what I'm saying? Or a band like Slipknot even. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. That's kind of what it reminds me of. What you're talking about. It's just the floodgates open. A lot of people are using those skills to do something different, taking those techniques and doing something new. And then with that, of course, comes the people that are just rehashing it, and you get some trite knockoffs every once in a while.
I mean, I'm just talking shit. It's just speculation, but I've always felt that Skrillex's ability to sort of flip electronic music the way that he did had a lot to do with his history in what band was he in?
First to Last.
First to Last, yeah. It has a lot to do with the production of that kind of music has more in common with his than what we were doing. So, like, when I say we, I mean, like, I was just making records, just listening to Daft Punk or whatever. He was listening to Daft Punk and then mixing it in that really tight way that a lot of that era of screamo and emo was mixed. You feel like a really hard thunk, like down in the low mids. You know what I mean? Like a lot of drum stuff from you guys and from Emmanuel. So I think that's a perfect example. He was taking something totally unrelated and he was making it work really, really well. So vice versa, you may have some kids who are really young right now who have lived through this electronic explosion, and then they're going to take it and flip it. And I mean, they might like pick up a guitar. There's really no telling. There's no telling. That's the whole point of kids making music. It's not made by old people. You know what I mean?
That's true. The Beatles were, the Beatles broke up by the time they were 30.
And that's I mean, I plan on making music forever, but I firmly believe that it's driven by kids because it's like a sixth sense. They don't have to think about it; they just do.
Exactly. They just take what they have and they try to make something new.
That's all I ever did.
Yep.
You know,
and you're still doing it, brother. You're still making it happen.
Trying to, man. Trying to.
Well, dude, Derek, DJA, it's been a pleasure having you come over here to the Smithsonian at such a late hour. I know you got an early morning in the morning, and thanks for coming over and chatting with me and having a few Coors Lights. Where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at Derek Allen, DJA, DEREK is how I spell my first name, but that's for SoundCloud, Twitter, and everything. And I mean, I try to keep it going. I got a lot of stuff coming out all the time.
And I'll post all those links into the show notes so you guys have a quick reference. Gonna obviously post that Blood Bros, guys. And if you like what you heard on the podcast and you want to hear more podcasts, you want to check out the back catalog, I'm already 40 plus episodes deep, guys. So check it out at SeanVersusWild.com, Facebook, Twitter, at Sean vs. Wild, Instagram, Sean vs. Wild Podcast. I'm on iTunes, SoundCloud, I'm not on SoundCloud, Stitcher, I should say, YouTube, bunch of places. So just, maybe Google something or just click on the link on the show notes. So, Derek, I appreciate you so much for coming over, brother.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it, man.
And guys, thanks so much for tuning in. This has been the Sean vs. Wild Podcast.